Hey, it is your buddy Peace and Harmony with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful empowered harmonizers. And we are zooming in and focusing in today on a very important, interesting topic, and that is obedience versus conscience. How do these two concepts interplay, especially when we understand its role in guiding or directing human behavior, violating of one's conscience or free will? What are the triggers that will elicit that problem? In other words, going contradictory to that which you feel in your heart of hearts is in the best interest of your conscience, how your conscience directs you, guides you. And when and if do you violate this? And this is a very important concept, excuse me, because I think you will see that it will very much tie into this own experience within your life and why perhaps it had caused you to derail yourself emotionally or go contradictory to your conscience, especially when you're in the presence of someone who is a malignant narcissist or a antisocial personality disorder, a psychopathic type of individual. Now, this discussion here begins with a very interesting study that was conducted in the early 60s, I believe like around 1961, 1962, with a Dr. Stanley Milgram, a doctor of psychology from the East Coast. And he wanted to look at the concept of obedience and authority, and specifically how this would affect one's conscience and whether one would indeed listen or tune into one's conscience, or would they override that in the presence of an authority figure. So he did a study with several hundred psychology students, and he basically gave them a prompter to send an electrical shock to test participants upon a learning activity. So in other words, they were seated and were in a chair where they could deliver different strengths and gradients of electric shock, beginning, with very harmless or, very unpainful, not pleasant, but certainly not severe, to, very severe pain, delivering, up to like 450 volts of electricity and electrical shock the test participant. And now the determining factor of whether they would deliver this electric shock in increasing amounts was determined by the extent to which the test subject could recite a learning test. In other words, they were to learn pairs of words, and if they were to get one wrong, then he would elicit a shock. And so it was to look at in the student's mind, in other words, what is the effect of pain on learning? In other words, if you were really under the gun and if you had to learn something, and you knew that a shock would be delivered, would it help make your learning stronger? Would you learn these pairs of words? Would you be able to perform accordingly for this test? Would it influence positively or negatively a learning procedure? And so what Stanley Milgram found was that then he placed himself as the authority figure for these students who were delivering the electric shock. So in other words, if this test subject had not learned these pairs of words, if they were to make a mistake, then Dr. Milgram would say, give the shock. And so he was the authority figure. And then he was able to then study how many of these students were to go on and elicit very strong and dangerous shocks to the participant, even though that they were shrieking, they were yelling in pain. Dr. Milgram would say, elicit the shock, just go on. And what he found was that even though most people would be very, very hesitant or leave the study if they were to be forced or required by an authority figure to elicit this very painful shock to another that they were seeing beyond the glass. You know, a lot of people would step out, but what he found was that there is an extremely high percentage, like 70% of those subjects would elicit a very dangerous, painful level of shock, which in the test, it wasn't really delivering it, but the test subject was actually screaming in pain. But he found that those students would be more obligatory to authority. They'd be more, they would conform to the authority and violate their own conscience. In other words, their obedience to authority would override their own conscience. And so what he found basically, or what he deduced from this abstract, from this study, and you can read about it in Dr. Martha Stout, her book, but what this basically states is that in the presence of authority, or when required by authority, one will violate one's conscience to be obedient or to acquiesce to the needs of an authority figure. So knowing this to be the case, this is exactly what a psychopathic individual, a malignant narcissist, psychopath, sets up in the perspective and minds of their supply and target, that they are in authority. They have this privileged position within your scope, within your dynamic of relationship. And then once they establish this, once they see that they have authority or precedence or power over you, it gives them the ability to make commands so that you will violate your own conscience. In other words, what you gutturally feel is right or wrong, or what you would do or not do, violating your own standards. In other words, participating in dangerous or high-risk behaviors or emotions or events that are contradictory to what you feel is right or wrong, or what you feel comfortable with. And it is because of this presence of authority. And so it's just like we see this playing out in a lot of businesses where a lot of employees then have to violate their own conscience, their own morality, their own sense of right or wrong in order to please the boss. You know, there's all sorts of people who have then whistleblowed on organizations and saying, you know, I could not stomach this anymore. I was up all night. My conscience was getting to me. You'll hear this statement. I felt so guilty. I felt so wrong. I felt like I could no longer do this to innocent people. So that's like a natural mechanism. Your conscience will eventually begin to break through. You can only take so much. But yet it is at the hands of this authority that one is then set up to bend to their will to that of the authority versus their own. So you can see then how someone who malignant narcissist or psychopathic would establish this superiority or place of power or authority over you, and then you would rapidly lose control of being obedient to your own conscience. In other words, you become obedient to their will, their needs, their commands, instead of honoring and respecting your own. So really, it's part of healing is an awareness that this has taken place and that it's not your fault. You did not do anything wrong. You know, this is just how these people manipulate, exploit, and take advantage of others. This is what they do. This is textbook manipulation. I mean, this is how these people get their foot in other people's conscience. They get their foot in the door of other people's conscientious or sense of morale, that they are able to interfere in that. So it's very important in healing to come back and to come home to your conscience. And like a viewer so aptly stated, day by day, the world is becoming more narcissistic. Day by day, we are hearing more about very low integrity, sociopathic sort of behaviors and problems. I mean, we hear more about, you know, people's the scandalous love affairs than we do about what is really important in the world. I mean, it's all trash talk, and it is all just garbage. But it's hard not to get swept away with the current when the media will surround you with this basically, 96% of the time. So it takes resistance. It takes awareness. It's saying, no, that is garbage. No, I'm not getting carried away by that shock and awe media. I'm not getting carried away by these types of websites. I'm not getting carried away by this social media. In fact, there's all sorts of stuff in the news right now where Facebook is being sued for their partnership with a third party, which has given them access to, millions and millions and millions of people's personal data. I think it's based in Canada. I'm not going to cite the name of the company right now. I'm sure if you're listening to the news, you've heard about it, but it calls forth the moral obligation of companies to protect their constituents, to protect their users. And whether this is regulated or not is basically on a day-to-day basis, but it shows you here the exploitation of innocent people to the needs of a organization who wants to harvest big data. And they will do that without people knowing or without their consent. And so there's this huge uprise. Elon Musk has recently deactivated his Facebook account. He's taken Tesla off of Facebook. He's so outraged that he was not protected. So it calls forth to say that, this and this individual, organization, social media platform does not have authority over me if they are not protecting my best interests and not in alignment with my conscience. So you can see that this is how it is set up for people to violate their own sense of conscience, which is a feeling of right or wrong, your moral compass, good or evil, that which is in the good nature, that which is, aligned with love and growth of the human spirit, or whether it's to the detriment, it's to the violation, it's to the exposure, it's to the selfish needs of another versus the whole of the group. So it's really important to be able to identify this, how this became a dynamic or an issue where it tore you apart from your own conscience. Did this individual act as an authority? Either, authority can be, or superiority can be by charm or influence or their certain degree of talent or their sense of humor or whatever it is that they had claimed authority over you, dominance, even though if it was done with a sense of humor, you can see then how this became part of the trickery, part of the manipulation, part of the problem with self-violation, violation of boundaries, not knowing that you have the right, your awareness of your right to privacy is taken away. It's obliterated. You no longer have a sense that you are able to say, no, this is my boundary. I'm not giving into this. This is not right. But it's so important because the groupthink, oftentimes in the situation, it overrides the individual think, or what is like really the individual comes to face with later in their life, and they're like, wow, I can't believe, for years or decades, I stayed in this game. Like, it has gotten me nowhere. So it's really, important to come to this awareness where your somewhere is. If it's, I want the real thing. I mean, you can just, hear documentaries on, people who have engaged in all the dating sites and the predators that they met, or the dating apps, and, how their relationships were, lasted for 2 to 3 days. And then, people have lists of hundreds of people. It's a hookup culture, basically, and how this is incorporated with a lot of drugs and things. And, this is not, even though it might be highly advertised, because oftentimes you take authority by numbers. In other words, if there's millions of people on this social media platform well, what's wrong with me if I'm not participating in it? You know, you might get that sort of societal pressure. You know, what else am I going to do but go on Tinder? What else am I going to do but go on Match? What else am I going to do but to, you know, portray myself as this objectified person? You know, everybody else will win the prize. That is not the answer. You know, do not be made jealous or envious of those people who are objectifying themselves in these platforms. Do not feel like they are the authority. They are the leaders. You must say no. You know, that is trash. That is taking advantage of, you know, the individual and their sexuality to be forced or to think that that is the culture that you need to fit into. You absolutely positively do not. So it's okay to turn it off and to step aside and to realize that it can become an addiction or take you out of control, or, you know, have authority over your life without you even knowing, and then violating your own sense of conscience. So it's really, you have to answer to your conscience. Wake that up. Know what your sense of right or wrong is. Do not be ashamed to hold your head up and say, that is hideous, that's disgusting, that's awful. You know, no, that is not a great Instagram. It's not great for me to be on Instagram and thinking that, you know, this is attractive. I need to really make a positive self-assessment. It's so important, especially when you can hear how harmful it is and how empty a culture is becoming with a lot of these websites and apps that are exploiting this sort of shock and awe. You know, don't be sucked in. Don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to turn it off. Don't be afraid to be on your own. Set up boundaries, set up your standards, protect yourself, and be aligned with your higher conscience. It will serve you very, very well. And I think you'll find you're much more fulfilled, happy, and becoming really the self-actualized, the person that you want to be when you're in tune with that higher consciousness. Be your own authority. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, here today, hoping that these videos do help. Please share and please subscribe for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support.